gentlemen, welcome back, and we bring to you yet another unique TSS 2021 masterclass on uncommon leadership. And we have Ms. Ruchira Chaudhary, founder TrueNorth Consulting, who's going to be in conversation with Mr. Ashutosh Pandey, MD and CEO, Mahindra First Choice Wheels. I'm going to request Mr. Ashutosh Pandey, who's a moderator for the session, to kindly take over.
Thank you so much, Samina. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ashutosh Pandey, and I had this great privilege of meeting Ruchira at one of the Isha programs a few months back. But more about that in a moment. You know, very rarely does one come across a book that makes you just sit up and take notice. And you know, usually if books are of management genre, you would rather feel they are textbookish. You know, you'd go to sleep almost if you're a reader like me. But you know, I picked it up for some reason, and it was absolutely unputdownable. You know, the book is called "Coaching: The Secret Code to Uncommon Leadership." Then I just kind of went back and thought maybe she's a seasoned author. You know, lo and behold, it turns out that this is her debut book. So I think here we have Ruchira, impeccable credentials. She's an alumnus of University of Chicago Booth School of Business. She's a leading executive coach. She is a faculty of multiple business schools, a highly sought after consultant. She's worked with M&A, org effectiveness. How many things have you done, Ruchira? You know, strategy, execution in Qatar Telecom, AIG, Medtronics, TCS, you name it. I mean, experience across geographies, Middle East, North Africa, Asia, India, China. So, you know, she packs a lot in her mind, of course, which as you will experience is really, really sharp and great. But more importantly, in the book, she picks up a subject that is frequently fuzzy, you know, and she coins a very interesting term called leader coach, right? And when she says leader coach, it intrigues someone to see, you know, what a leader coach essentially is. And let me just first, you know, come back to the, you know, just share with you a few, can you see my screen? I hope everyone can see my screen. This is the book, which is, you know, the secret code to uncommon leadership. And look at who's written the forward, who's written a high praise for her. I mean, Sheryl Sandberg herself, a great author and an executive, you know, of high repute, saying, understanding how to coach and develop others is key to leading successful teams. Coaching can be incredibly tough. Thanks to Ruchira, we now have a great playbook. This book is filled with meaningful lessons on authentic communication, balancing, managing, and guiding. I hope you read it. I hope you read it too, because I found it very, very useful. And I think it is a book that no wonder has been on the bestseller charts in Singapore, Southeast Asia, India, you name it. But before I become her agent, let me kind of go on with the session. And so, Ruchira, welcome to you. You know, I'm really intrigued by this whole business of leader coach. I've heard of servant leaders. I've heard of, you know, these hyper type A leaders and so on. What's a leader coach, and how did you come to this?
Ashutosh, first, thank you very much. I think you could have, you know, if you choose not to be the CEO of Mahindra Wheels someday, and we can try and find you a job as being a fabulous marketing agent, because my God, I don't think my own publisher has done such a fantastic job of recommending the book as you have. So thank you. And also thank you for making the time for this conversation. You know, for me, having this conversation with somebody who's an uncommon leader in his own right, a leader coach, which is also what you personify, is perhaps really what is going to make this session come alive. And I hope we can make this interactive and informal, and, you know, get some questions from our audience as well. Okay, so back to your question. What makes a leader coach? Can I just rewind a little bit and tell you about maybe the inspirational, and then I'll get right to the meat, or the, you know, to the heart of the topic. I was reading a fair bit. You know, Penguin had commissioned the book. I'd moved to India about 3 years ago. I've lived for the last 15 years in Singapore, and prior to that in the Middle East. Coaching, for those of you who have read the book or will read the book, was not something just that I went out seeking. It was serendipity, I think. I was in an organization where I felt there was a complete vacuum of any kind of enablement. And at the same time, University of Chicago, which is also my alma mater, they said they were looking for somebody who could help a lot of leaders, be their coach as the resident executive coach. Now, I'm saying this to you because for somebody who's written a book about leader as coach, I found this whole notion of coaching very fuzzy, very amorphous, not tangible. I thought of myself as this hard-nosed consultant who would advise organizations. I did M&A. As you said, I've packed it a lot, maybe too much. M&A, org design, transformation. And when this opportunity came my way, I was already going through a very turbulent time in my career. And I said, let's embrace it and let's find out what coaching is, because all the feedback was that you are somebody who gives clarity to people. You're somebody who takes away the noise. So a lot of leaders had said that they enjoyed conversations with me. I gave them clarity was the word that kept coming back. And so I did this as a bit of an experiment with the University of Chicago, the Booth School of Business. And in essence, I realized this was really about unraveling knots in somebody's head, right? And as I sort of got really deep into the literature and got very passionate about this, I realized that it's not just about people like me who are coaching leaders like you, Ashutosh, but everybody here is that leader coach. And why do we need that today? Why is it so important? There is such alarming statistics. James Cousins and Barry Posner, they're academics, but they've also written a really stellar book on leadership, right? And they say that leadership is perhaps the most important asset in every organization. Yet research is telling us that we have a huge shortage of leaders in the pipeline. It's a really serious global concern. And then there is a World Economic Forum, and they do this survey, a global agenda survey. Sustainability is a big part of that. And they say that 86% of the respondents agree that we have a leadership crisis in the world today. So what does it really mean? It's not as if we don't have competent people. It's not as if we don't have capable people, right? I think it's really about our approach to building those leaders. It's how we have to rethink. Nations and organizations typically promote the best and the brightest. They decide that if Ruchira is the best salesperson, then she has to become the sales manager or the sales leader, right? If you have somebody who's achieving his or her numbers, somebody who's scoring the highest runs, we make them captains of the team. Now, the challenge here is even the best and the brightest need to be coached and nurtured so they in turn can do that, right? If you're a fabulous finance professional, you've learned it, yeah, you know what assets and liabilities are, you've learned it over the years. Then as you go up in the hierarchy, you learn a thing or two more about finance and you become fabulous at what you do. And then they promote you to become whatever, CFO or one down. But that doesn't mean that you'll automatically become that leader. So why do we stop short of teaching you leadership, right? And that's our challenge. Often leaders can't take others along in the journey because they've never been nurtured and coached themselves. In fact, University of Chicago, there's Professor Benjamin Bloom. In the early 90s, he did an experiment. And that experiment, sorry, Ashutosh, I'm meandering, but I just thought
No, please go on. Very.
This is an experiment, and in the experiment, he tried to figure out what makes a great scientist, a great mathematician, a great sports person, what makes somebody fabulous at their craft, right? And as they sort of unpeeled the onion, they realized all of these superstars, right, were not superstars to begin with. They were gifted, but they were never the best. There's one thing in common between these fabulous mathematicians, doctors, or scientists, is that they all had teachers, they all had coaches, they all had people who encouraged them and nurtured them. I guess what I'm saying is that it is the coaching that we need to impart. That's a missing link. When we coach our superstars, they become those leaders that in turn will coach the leaders of tomorrow, right? So I guess long-winded answer, what is coaching and what?
So one point here. I mean, when I read your book, this is I found it very entertaining, but I think it's equally controversial of you taking examples of Sachin Tendulkar and many others to demonstrate how, excellent star performance need not be great coaches. I mean, why is it that a great performer does not always become a great coach? I mean, you can take the question later if I'm coming in your way in terms of.
No, absolutely. We can stop here. I was just, So let's go back to that point where how we automatically assume, or we just assume that best performer equal to best captain of the ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
You scoring, you making your numbers, you're doing a fabulous job. Oh, of course you'll get promoted, and with promotion comes people.
Mm-hmm.
And as the annals of history has shown us, the best captain of the team is not necessarily your best performer or your best solo player, right? And cricket would be that example.
Yeah.
And I use that. The example of Sachin is interesting, because if you take Sachin Tendulkar as he's the best, I won't say batsman, he's the best cricketer the world has ever seen, I think, right? But if you look at his days as the captain of the cricket team, those are perhaps the darkest time in an otherwise stunning career, right? It's largely forgotten. But Sachin's challenge was different, right? We just assumed that he would morph into that leader who would have the ability to take others along. Now, remember, if you're that gifted, if you're that fabulous at your craft, sometimes it's very hard to take people along, because you can't understand the capability gap between where you are today, where somebody else is, right? And you often sort of benchmark them with your own expectations. And that's a challenge, right?
Correct.
So good leaders need to understand that people have strengths, and people also have weaknesses, and you need to play to those strengths, and you need to help build the areas that need work, which was his challenge, right?
And you also mentioned in the same breath, Kalanick, Travis Kalanick and Dara Khosrowshahi in the same breath, right? Yeah.
So three reasons, actually, if I had to distill it, right? Sachin's example is really about a superstar who's so focused on his or her craft that finds it hard to recognize the capability gap. There is a second variety that loves what he or she does, right? But doesn't want to lead, doesn't want to get burdened by captaincy. To some extent, I believe Sachin's narrative was that. But I've come across great performers, solo performers, and they don't want to lead teams. But because a society and a workplace, there are pressures. And the only way we sort of progress in our careers is by getting promoted. And promotion means more people. So that's a second reason. The third reason, which is perhaps what you were alluding to, is that when we promote these superstars, remember, some organizations treat these people as their blue-eyed boys and girls, right? And over years of doing so well and making your numbers every quarter, you sort of start believing this is an entitlement, not a responsibility. Because you have inordinate amount of resources, you can frankly do no wrong in an organization. Everybody loves you, eats out of your hand because you're so fabulous. And of course, they naturally assume you'll be that perfect leader. But the trouble is, because this sense of entitlement overrides the sense of responsibility. And a lot of the traits that have made you successful as a solo performer, a lot of passion, ambition, even some amount of narcissism, doesn't translate well to being a great leader. Because the traits we need as leaders often are very contrarian to this. Empathy, taking others along in the journey, right? Appreciating the unique strengths of people. And so herein lies a dichotomy. So if we feel our superstars have it in them, if they have the potential, not just current performance, if we gauge that they have the potential and they truly want to be leaders, then we need to coach them and we need to nurture them. So they in turn can be those leaders that coach others.
Excellent. So on that note, let's come back to coaching, because I think I interrupted your narrative.
That's okay. I thought after all this, we should define coaching, right? The way I've done it in the book. So if you can go to the next slide, I'll do that. If you Google it today, I can't remember when I last did it, was 800,000 hits. Now coaching. But when, in my mind, this is what I thought came closest to the definition of a coach as a leader, which is when you coach somebody who works with you, works for you in your team, as a process, what are you trying to do? You're maximizing their current performance, but importantly, their future potential. And the keywords here are non-directive and self-enabling interactions. So non-directive, i.e. you're not telling them what to do, and you're enabling them to find their own path. So the whole premise of coaching is about asking, not telling. It's about helping people find their unique path. It's not your playbook as a leader. It's not what made you successful in the past. It's what will make them successful in the past. So you have to help them find their own solution, their own different ways of working. And that's really, in essence, what you will do as a leader that coaches and builds others.
Almost reads like a true mathematical formula. Coaching equals to non-directive self plus self-enabling. I mean, expected entirely of an M&A, superstar to kind of write the book on coaching.
Yeah, they told me with the first draft when I sent it to my prof, he said, you're a semi-academic. I said, yeah, whatever that means. So you need to put in models. So anyway, so I guess bottom line, I mean, and this is something I'm sure many of you have read before, and famously Mahatma Gandhi sent it, right? He said that the sign of a good leader is not really about the followers you have, but it's truly about creating leaders creating leaders. And that's what we hope to do, through this conversation today, telling you a little bit more about how coaching is that missing link, how coaching is that key or that secret code that will unlock uncommon leadership for you.
So here I have one question, Ruchira, and it's actually frequently, asked. We have a lot of words going around in corporate. There are mentors, there is coaching, there are guides, there are, advisors, counselors, reverse mentors. I mean, you name it, there's all kinds of formula going around, right? I mean, are these all same? How is coaching any different from what others? I mean, so how should we take coaching compared to some of these, similar sounding formulations?
I think it's a fabulous question, and I'm not going to define all the terms because I'd be worried if people Google them and they're wrong. But let's take the one the terminology that we often confuse or use interchangeably with coaching, mentoring, right? And in a sense, a lot of the others are derivatives of that. Advising, reverse mentoring is basically somebody who reports into you, does that. But in essence, if we were to just double down on what coaching is versus this broader term of mentoring, mentoring, in my mind, is really somebody who's been there and done that, typically senior, but doesn't have to be from your ecosystem. Could be an ex-boss, an ex-client, could be a family friend. And mentors dispense wisdom. They give you advice. You have a lot of credibility with them because they know you well, either personally or professionally. And they constantly try to guide you, advise you, right? So the word is it's more telling, it's more prescriptive in many ways because they know you and they want to help you succeed, right? And so if I were to give a more interesting analogy, I think a mentor watches you from the balcony, but a coach is somebody who's with you on the dance floor, right? The coach is typically somebody who's in your current ecosystem, could be your boss, could be a colleague, could be your boss's boss. Is typically somebody who also can roll up his or her sleeves and get into the weeds with you, gives you a lot of real-time feedback, tells you how things are going, not going so well. So that's where all the action is happening. And these can be very short-term relationships as well, right? Whereas mentoring is more guiding you sometimes through your life's journey, and coaching is your current practice. But I guess in essence, the difference is coaching is all about asking you powerful questions, open-ended questions typically, so you can find your own answers. Mentoring is more about telling you and advising you so that, and they both have a very valuable part, by the way. And
you use both of them? Is that how it works? You use
absolutely. I encourage people to, in fact, have a personal board of advisors. It could be a mix of mentors and coaches, right? And I think to be successful, we really should get both. Those that tell us what to do and advise us, and clearly people that we trust. And we trust them because we know that they have their best interest at heart, but also coaches who are constantly pushing our boundaries, constantly making us better than we are today, making us a better version of ourselves.
Yeah, so here, one of the questions that just come from the audience, and I think it's an interesting question. Why do you think leaders of 21st century need necessarily to be coaches? I think it runs counter to a lot of established, mindset about leadership, especially in entrepreneurial circles, and especially if you are a startup, you expect the guy to be, pumping fist all the time and working 24 hours, living on Red Bulls and other stuff.
I agree.
How do you square it?
It's a great question, and by the way, it's come at the right juncture because our slide says coaching is no longer a specialty. You cannot be a good leader without being a good coach, and on why so, right? You can be both, by the way. You can still have all the Red Bulls and pump iron, etc. You can still find that balance between being aggressive, and being firm with somebody. But I guess the question here is slightly broader. The days of command and control, of telling people what to do, is passé for a few reasons. Because The world as we know it has evolved a lot, right? We call it the VUCA world for a reason. It's very volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, and complex. Prior to World War II, our lives were a lot simpler. We had self-contained businesses. We ran those businesses. Of course, it was a tough job. Leaders always have a tough job. But then post-World War II, we started having some offshoring, some sales, some marketing in other parts of the world. Okay, it got a little more complex. But now, our world as we know it is completely complex, right? It's a complex network of alliances, there's digitization, we are so wired, we are so networked. At a time like this, no single individual, no matter how competent you are, how experienced you are, can have all the answers. Coaching is also about leveraging the collective intelligence of your people. It's about getting a diverse set of points of view. It's about seeking those answers. And the best leaders do that by taking others along in the journey, by constantly surrounding themselves with experts. And they recognize that they can't do it all, they don't know it all. And that's also coaching. Right? If you can take the pandemic as an example, if you look at the businesses that not just survived, but really thrived through this crisis, it wasn't one individual telling everybody what to do. You had to seek those answers together. The whole open-endedness of the pandemic meant that nobody knew what would come tomorrow. At a time like this, you constantly need to ask, you need to work together, you need to collaborate. So that command and control style truly could not have worked. And we've seen that firsthand, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. In fact, in most of our businesses, being geographically dispersed during the pandemic, but still you have to manage, it's very easy for command and control to break down. I think it's really a good point. One other point related, and someone else has just posted a question. Again, I'm taking the liberty of pushing on questions to you, because I think that's the intent. When you're talking of leadership as a coach, and you refer to sometimes superstars don't become, great coaches, are you referring to coaching being some kind of a inborn trait within someone, or do you think that it's a acquired skill, or something that people can learn specifically, or is it something that people are born with?
It's a very interesting question, Ashutosh, and I try to address it in the book. Maybe not given it enough time, but the book's already 362 pages. So the answer is yes and no. Some of us are naturally good at, coaching, because I guess we have higher emotional quotient, the ability to, interact in a social environment better than others. So for some of us, it's just natural, right? But having said that, if you truly want it, if you recognize that you're not coaching or you're not enabling, that you're not doing that enough, I think you can become that leader coach if you aspire to be. But for that, you need to first be willing to change, right? First, the recognition, which is self-awareness, that, I'm not perfect and I could do something differently. But I think, to me, the biggest part of this is that coaching is not about learning something new as a leader. Coaching is actually unlearning. It's about letting go of your old beliefs. It's about letting go of how you've led for so long. It's letting go of the fact that every solution doesn't need to be, you don't have to give the answer to every solution. Like in school and college, they taught us that you need to always have the answers, and that's what makes us great. In business school, they never taught us about leading or coaching, and we thought of these subjects as soft skills. But honestly, they are now the hardest bits. You know that as a CEO, right? Your people challenges are your hardest areas. So going back to that piece, yes, I think everybody can be the leader coach. You need to recognize, you need to change, and you need to unlearn.
Yeah, and I think one of the other pieces, then people will say, yeah, I can understand that coaching is an essential attribute of leadership today. In fact, an indispensable attribute. But do you have, is there a way? Is it something that's left? I saw that very interesting 4C, which I've taken the liberty of pasting on the slide, and just putting this. What's this framework about? Looks like a chess pieces, or you are putting crossword.
I didn't. This graphic is actually have this fabulous, individual called Ajay. He was part. part editor, part this. He also runs a fabulous digital marketing agency. So he did that for me, but there's no particular order. And as I was saying to you earlier, as an academic, I was always expected to have a model, and all the models have to, I needed to find C's. So I think I found the C. But so on a sort of serious note, I really wanted to be able to articulate what your coaching would do for the individual that you're coaching, right? As a leader, when you truly embark on this coaching journey, or if you want to just hone and polish that journey that you're already on, what is it that you will achieve? What will be the coaching outcomes be for that person that you will spend time coaching? And I tried to find the answer, and I honestly couldn't get it in an HR journal or coaching websites, etc. And so I started looking at rather unconventional media. My son was watching Kung Fu Panda, I think, I don't know, 10 times or something. So I actually picked up some bits from there, some from my life, but a lot of it is from film and sports and performing arts. And then I came up with this model, which I tried to make it simple. To me, the 4C plus model has 4 cornerstones, and these 4 cornerstones will come alive with a 5th one at the base. The first one is capability. I'll read through it in the next slide, but capability, consciousness, confidence, and clarity, that's the 4 C's. And they come alive, on a foundation of culture. I'll talk about it more as we go to the next slide, Ashutosh. I've detailed it out. So what is capability? Capability really is making you the best that you can be, helping you unleash your unique potential. And that's what a good leader does, playing to your strengths. When you coach somebody, you help them spark that creativity, that latent creativity, and the innovation that can come through when you create safe spaces for them. When you let them, when they understand that they can be themselves without judgment or fear of penalization, the sky is a limit for the kind of innovation that you'll see come out of your organizations or your teams. You can help them think differently and laterally, and you can truly help them assemble their own career ladder, right? Sheryl Sandberg calls it a jungle gym. I haven't used that word, but I guess what I'm saying here is ladders don't have to be vertical, or rather they shouldn't be ladders in the first place. My career, as you say, has packed in so much, but there was a time when, I've had my ups and downs and very squiggly lines, right? It was for a lot of people looking at my CV and not hiring me in Singapore, by the way, they would say, oh, you haven't done one thing. You've moved around so much. It's not a straight line path. And there was almost a disadvantage at that point. And now as the world is changing, we need leaders who appreciate those that bring in all these, bring in these unique facets. That's what I think makes organizations so fabulous, because you can bring in so much diversity of opinion. I'll come to the consciousness bit, but it's also about confidence, right? And especially with women leaders, I've seen that no matter how successful some of us are, or no matter what our achievements, we're constantly doubting our own ability to do better, to do more. And a good leader coach will give you that self-belief to go forward. Clarity, one of perhaps I think a lot of leaders that I interviewed as part of the book writing process said this was perhaps the most important bit. In fact, if you look at the book cover, if I can place it for you again, it's really a big spaghetti, and that untangles. And it's not just about untangling, but it's also about, it's also about going up and making you a better version and making you shine brighter. Yeah, it took a really long time to get the graphic right. But so that's clarity. And I think the last bit, which is very relevant for us as we talk about sustainability today, is I think greater consciousness. Being more aware of who you are, but also looking further into the horizon. It's not about here and now. It's not about how I can be a better leader, but can I do something different 3 years from now, 5 years from now? How can I contribute to the larger, good of perhaps the planet, my organization? And to make all of these cornerstones come alive, as I said earlier, as leaders, we need to consciously inculcate a culture of coaching, which means in your own small ways, whether it's role modeling, whether it's seeking feedback about yourself, not just giving feedback, that's also coaching, right? You create a culture where giving feedback, receiving feedback becomes the norm. So that's really my framework. And I think if you categorize your coaching into those criteria, you will find the journey a lot simpler.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at it, Ruchira, I think, forgive me for saying it, but I think looks like a profile of, an idealized person, someone, a self-actualized kind of a person, someone who's got the capability, consciousness. I mean, you're almost bordering on the spiritual, it seems, confidence, clarity. I mean, these are very good. I mean, of course, anyone will intuitively relate to it. But, how does one bring it alive in practice? Because, how do I become a more conscious leader? How do I develop this consciousness part of it, etc.? I mean, is there something that the leader has to do on oneself more than on others? Is that how you're looking at these?
I mean, it's a good question, but again, it sounds perfect because also I had to find the right C words for my model to make it. Consciousness is actually, Ashutosh, frankly, another word for self-awareness. And increasingly, as we read more literature and as you probably do more introspection, you realize it has to come from within, right? We have to be more self-aware if we truly want to succeed as leaders that enable and really take our organizations to the next level. What is self-awareness, right? First, recognizing that you're not perfect, nobody is, but truly trying to work upon the areas where you feel that you could do better, right? And how do you do that is a standard question everybody asks me. Rest, introspection, lots of reflection, finding the moments to pause and think. But what I said earlier, it's also about seeking that feedback. It's uncomfortable, right? We don't seek feedback. And especially when, you're an entrepreneur, you're a CEO like you are, Ashutosh, you're at the top of the pyramid, right? And people believe, interestingly, who are at the top of the pyramid get very little feedback. We just assume because they've been that successful, they've come this far, they don't need to do better. They know it all. But the fact of the matter is, I think you need that coaching as much as anybody else does. In my book, I cite the example of an APAC head. He runs a large investment bank here. I can't tell you more. And he actually spent a lot of time telling me that how much he craves something from his boss. But every time they meet in one part of the world or the other, I mean, pre-pandemic days, I suppose, life just takes over. It's always about business. It's always about people in your teams, but it's never about you. And I think we need to change that narrative, right? At every level, we need to be consciously seeking that feedback, seeking that coaching, and also passing it on. That's what makes us better leaders.
So I get that self-awareness or consciousness by seeking feedback, both from an organizational perspective where you can put in some processes, or from individual, you take the individual initiative. But say, how does one work on clarity, confidence? Aren't these inborn in some way, or do you think a lot of experimentation goes into doing this? I mean, how does it work?
No, you're absolutely right. A lot. So back to the coaching pieces, when you give somebody the safe space, when you give them the time to have those conversations, when these conversations are not about you telling them what to do, right? And in a sense, what do I do as a coach? It's not as if you don't have the answers. I'm really helping you not just untangle the knots, but forming distinct patterns in your head so that you get a lot more clarity in terms of this path exists. Oh, but I could also do this, and this exists. And it doesn't have to be linear, right? You don't go from one A to B to C to D. But because there's so much going on in our lives, there's just so much noise outside that when you get somebody who's a sounding board, somebody who's not sitting in judgment. And by the way, I know it's hard because as a leader, you're also managing and appraising that person. So to find that balance between giving your people clarity and managing them and appraising them, giving them the confidence, giving them the consciousness, and of course, making them capable. That is the crux of it. It's all hard work, right? But that's what I think truly sets apart an uncommon leader from one who's a good leader, but not a fabulous.
Yeah, so I get a perfect question from the audience. And this is something that, that I should have anticipated when I was preparing, but, it's come. So let me just ask this. So, this participant says that, look, I try very hard on reflecting on what you're saying. I try very hard to be self-aware, to not be critical, to give clarity, to kind of develop capability. And I do think I do that well for a few days if I'm lucky, or maybe a week. I'm paraphrasing him a little bit. So
fair enough.
With forgiveness, seeking forgiveness from them. But the thick of things, you just regress back to your default habits and things like that. How do you kind of, what are the tips and tricks when you are kind of regressing to kind of make sure that you remain that person?
So I think Yeah, and it's completely natural to do that, right? But in my mind, when I talk about coaching, I think of it as 4 or 5 key things. One is you have to accept that coaching, when you coach somebody, you will not see the results overnight, right? Coaching needs a lot more consistency. Uh, a lot of people call it fuzzy and amorphous for a reason, because you think it's not tangible. So there needs to be consistency in how you coach somebody. That consistency then nearly just has to become almost a habit. It becomes part of who you are. And yes, there will be times in times of duress and when things are not going wrong, you will revert to that style where you will tell somebody what to do. Remember, we've always been taught, we always have this urge to give solutions because that's who we are, right? I do that as a consultant. As someone who's done M&A for so long, when I'm coaching somebody and his organization's about to get sold, this individual is grappling and wants to quit, first reaction. And one part of me is saying, no, 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 don't be silly. You have to hold on. But I can't say that because I truly want him or her to get to that answer, right? Mm-hmm. So one is consistency. Two is a realization that you have to internalize it. Then you also have to think about how you coach somebody. You know, you have to sort of play to people's strengths. It's almost bespoke in some ways, right? You can't take the same off-the-shelf conversation with one individual and transpose it to the other person. And there's a lot of interesting research which says that the way you coach those that are veterans or that are experienced people, vis-a-vis how you coach those that are rookies or just starting out in their journey, is very different. When you're young and just about starting, or when you give them feedback which is really crushes their ego, that's not a great idea. It can be more generic. You can tell them things from a broad-based level. But when you become a lot more experienced, if you're a star tennis player, if you tell that person, hey, that wasn't a good shot, that doesn't do anything for that person. But when you get really specific and says you need to turn your wrist more, that is specific feedback, right? But you wouldn't do that to somebody who's just starting out. You'll give them tips. You'll say that was a good presentation, but maybe you could have engaged the audience a little bit more. Maybe you could have asked more questions. So that's sort of the vein. But I guess I'm not sure if I've answered your question. We will have times where we will fall back into what I call that valley of despair. We have to be resilient leaders for ourselves and also for those that we are leading. And regressing sometimes and falling back on that old style of leading is okay too, right? As long as we are self-aware and we can quickly come back out and hopefully become that leader coach that we aspire to be.
Yeah, I think so. There's another question, and again, and you are in the coaching space, so you'll understand this question better. Do you have an opinion on coaching framework using the GROW model?
Yes, I use it quite a bit, in fact. I put it in the book, and I've also added some other frameworks. It's not mine, obviously. It's been around since the early 90s. I think it gives you a good structure to have a conversation with somebody. A lot of people, and I'm sure Ashutosh wants to ask me that question at some point. They ask me, oh, do I need to be accredited? Do I need to go through training? Training never hurts, but no, you don't have to be, because the kind of leadership coaching that you will do is really about structuring these conversations. Sometimes these could be bite-sized conversations. Sometimes you could have longer conversations. These conversations could happen in the corridor. They could happen in a conference room, which could be more structured. They could happen when you WhatsApp somebody and say, let's talk for 5 minutes. It can happen over a Zoom call, which is clearly a lot more the case these days. But I think in essence, if you can think about a way of structuring that conversation to get to the desired outcome, I think the GROW model is a fantastic tool to use. There are others, but this is perhaps the most commonly used by most coaches.
Yeah. So I think let me just try and kind of make, this is the ESG world now. And one of the big governance mantras, etc., is the whole sustainability and all the other environment-related sensitivities, etc. Personally, I feel, given where I am sitting, that ESG is going to change the way we manage businesses. In as much as seminal a way as perhaps the management and ownership bifurcation did way back in the early 1900s or even before. So, you think in this era where, sustainability is a big mantra, this is a framework that becomes a very useful arsenal for any leader?
It's a generic coaching framework, and absolutely, we can definitely apply it. to perhaps reinvent our businesses with a focus on sustainability, right? When you were talking about the book, the reason I thought of Paul Polman, because I first approached him to write my foreword. He was very, very gracious, but I think he had a lot of commitments at that point in time. And to me, he's a shining example of a global CEO, the ex-global CEO now of Unilever, who truly has brought home that point about how you can run successful businesses and yet have a very strong accent on sustainability. And I've used him in the book. In fact, my editor couldn't understand it. He's saying, why have you put trees in there? I said, no, that's a quote, that we are short of trees and leaders today, right? And we need leaders. And I love what he says about leaders that are courageous and purpose-driven. By the way, good leader coaches also have to have courage, because it takes a lot of courage to have hard conversations with people. We can always find the easy way out and tell people what to do. But when you're coaching somebody, it's intangible, it can be fuzzy, and there's no beginning and end, and you don't have the answer yourself sometimes. So yes, courage is a very basic tenet of a leader. And you need to be purpose-driven, systematic thinkers. And the more we invest in leaders like this, I mean, I completely agree that we are better off, because it's about connecting to humanity. And I love what he says about, and I think Greta Thunberg says that as well. And she says, you have to leave the planet in a better shape for others to enjoy. We clearly are not doing a great job of that. So can we coach our leaders to connect with that part? The answer to me is absolutely.
So let's unpack this statement. I think leaders who are courageous, purpose-driven, and what you're adding a dimension of purpose on the coaching. So are you saying that the purpose is essentially the wind behind the sails, in a way, that leaders who are purpose-driven are inherently more more amenable to be treating others as individuals in their own right? Is that the way to look at it?
Absolutely. I mean, the fact is, as we said, we saw in that quote earlier from Mahatma Gandhi also, it is about creating leaders, right? I worked for several years in Medtronic, and their erstwhile CEO says, leaders help their people find their own true north, right? It's about connecting to a larger purpose. And I think good leaders incubate a culture where you truly want to, make those that work with you, that work for you, appreciate their role in the larger scheme of things. And I think leaders that truly believe in a purpose find it much easier to take others along in the journey. They're very clear about the destination. They paint that destination, with very nice broad brush strokes. So it's easy for you to imagine where you are today, where you want to go. And I think leaders like Paul Polman have done that. They've shown it to us. Unilever has done that. There are a whole bunch of organizations that have done such a sterling job. Marks and Spencer's also does that. I used to go to H&M and take all my clothes, by the way, because they talked so much about recycling. And I loved the narrative around it. And I'm just a customer who didn't know any better, right? So I think there's this ethos, and that ethos, when an employee understands the linkage between his or her personal value system and how it aligns to the organizational value system. And if you can hone and sharpen that through the coaching, giving people more consciousness and clarity, I think you have a winner on your hands.
Yeah. So there is a question which is again taking it a little bit in a direction where they're asking for specific advice on this. Yoga and meditation over a period of time can help achieve the 4C. So that's the essential ingredient behind 4C. Why do intellectual minds? But the question is very interesting. Part is this.
Okay, let's hear.
Why do you think the intellectual minds don't see this? Why can't intellectual minds relate to yoga and meditation?
I'm going to put you in a corner, Ashutosh, because you can answer this question. You know that a lot better than I do. Having been such an integral part of Isha, having clearly assimilated the book, and I think you seem to agree with a lot of the concepts. I think you will be able to do a much better job than me.
Yeah, but you're the superstar today and the coach both. I mean, I have a point of view on that, which I'll give in a sentence. But I think personally, I think it is not correct to say that intellectual minds can't grasp yoga and meditation.
Agreed.
It's actually a stage of the journey, and maybe self-awareness is that key linchpin. The more people become sensitive about what they are doing and aware about what they're doing themselves, that's what happens. But you have a much more templatized answer in your framework, which
no, but I tend to agree with you. I mean, I don't think
you will never have that elegant answer.
The two are not mutually exclusive, right? You can still appreciate yoga, you can still meditate, you can still, and I guess the whole premise all along, if I've given you the impression that a good leader coach is all about nurturing and being nice to people, no, at the end of the day, you are making your numbers, right? All I'm saying is grow your numbers, but think about growing your numbers by first growing your people. The whole narrative is about take your people along in the journey and your numbers will follow, right? Be intellectual. And I would just say that as a leader, do what works for you, whether it's meditation, whether it's yoga, whatever helps you find that inner you is what you should strive to do. If you feel that's what gives you a greater awareness about the being, about, connecting with others, then go ahead and do that. But again, I don't have a prescriptive approach to doing that. You have to find that inner sort of, you have to find your own solution. In a sense, coach yourself to be the best you are. And don't be afraid to seek coaching from others either.
Yeah. So one of the things that may clarify this is, do you have examples of model leader coaches? I mean, I can throw in a name, but but if you have examples, do you have examples that bring this to life of leaders who are self-aware, are able to take tough decisions, but are also able to take people along, do broad brush visioning?
No, there are many. I mean, there's a case study in the book, which is Microsoft, largely inspired by Hit Refresh, but also because, again, a bit biased, I must candidly admit. Satya Nadella was a senior many years ago at the University of Chicago, and I've seen him in action. And he really brought it to life. And his narrative is so authentic, where he talks about the fact that when he took over a completely broken Microsoft, from the time in 2014, and then they looked at and I think in a manner of 5 years, he'd reversed not just the revenues, but also how people perceived working in that organization, which was completely broken. It was siloed. There was politics. It was the words the case study describes it as very toxic work culture, very combative work culture. And when he starts to distill it, he said, I realized it wasn't my AI or my cloud computing or the other, business initiatives that we took. Those definitely helped. But at the heart of all of that is how we recalibrated, or as he says, hit refresh. It was about the culture. The C in the CEO stands for the culture. And that's where I got it right. And how he did that was for 2 years, he, along with Kathleen Hogan, his head of HR, they spent time listening to people. They literally would go and meet everybody. And some of the quotes are that he gave a senior vice president the same attention as he gave to somebody who was perhaps, at the bottom end of the value chain. He wouldn't flinch, he would look at you, he would listen, he would absorb. And after 2 years, they basically distilled all of those learnings and then crystallized it. And they have a very interesting management excellence framework. It's called model, coach, and care. So every leader has to be the role model. Model the behaviors that you want people in your team to portray. Care for them. So the care bit is really about the empathy that we talk about. Really understand, appreciate that not everybody's reality is the same. And like the pandemic, we're not always in the same boat. We could be in the same storm. So you really have to care for your people and nurture them. And the last bit is, of course, coach. Be that coach. And they also get measured on it, by the way. It's not a soft and fuzzy thing. Yeah. So when they look at your performance scores at the end of the year, they look at not just how many numbers or how much revenue you achieved, but how many people you enabled. Did you make more leaders? Are people happy with you as a leader? I'm sure they do a complex thing of engagement scores, etc. But I'm saying it's not just about being nice or kind. It is about revenue.
And he's taken really tough decisions. I mean, it's not.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So we'll just go ahead and finish the couple of things that you had, because I have one last question for you, and we got just 2 minutes. So I just wanted to kind of, the toughest question is for the last. So I just wanted to...
No, I guess the slide is self-explanatory, but really, that's as I said earlier, it's about aligning those personal and corporate values from a sustainability focus, right? And you have to take people along in the journey. And as I, CP Gurnani said that to me. He was also one of the speakers, and it really resonated with me. It's not just about building empires, but it's also about the journey. It's about articulating the long-term purpose. Where are we going with this, right? And if you want to make sustainability come alive, you have to weave into the culture of the organization. All that you do and you say as a leader, you have to role model it.
Yeah. Yeah. So in fact, that brings me to the last question. And I've been meaning to ask you for several months. we've heard, your forward is Kiran Mazumdar Shaw wrote your forward. Nanda Nilekani has high praise for your book. And your prof, of course, they're very justifiably proud of you. Cheryl Sandberg, Suresh Narayanan, even Maithili Raj, the cricketer. I mean, how do you get such high praise? I've been struggling to get praise from my boss in the last 20 years I've been working.
Maybe I just got lucky. I think it's not about me, it's about them. I think they are just uncommon leaders who truly appreciated. They spend the time, they heard me out, they listen the narrative. But many of them, believe it or not, have actually spent the time, read the book, which amazed me. Like Cheryl knows she knows the book cover to cover. We gave it to her in draft form, by the way. But I think it's really about them. It's these leaders truly believe that, as Kathleen Hogan says, it's the leaders of today that have to empower and enable the leaders of tomorrow. And when you believe in something that strongly, I think it was an easy one for them to endorse the book, not so much me. But thank you.
And I think it's a tribute to the terrific content that's packed into this book. You say it's 300 pages. I'll go back and check if it's 300. I read it in a couple of days. So I think even by my standards, it was fast. So I think it's been great speaking with you, Ruchira. I think in these last 50 minutes, you've brought alive the whole coaching in a completely different way, away from the, big, we make a hoo-ha about something, make it a fad. When you brought it alive with, such live examples and with such a simple framework. So thank you so much, Ruchira, for spending this evening with us. And I'm sure the whole audience has been pretty enlightened by what you say. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Ashutosh, for taking the time.